He wasn't supposed to hear anything out there. Not in a canyon that had been silent for 4 years. The wind moved first, slow and dry, dragging grains of red dust across the cracked floor like whispers that had forgotten their words, and the sun hung low over the canyon walls, bleeding gold into the stone as if time itself had been stretched too thin and left to fade, and somewhere between that light and the long shadows it cast, a man walked with a dog who had once saved his life without making a sound. Ethan Cole kept his steps measured. Boots crunching lightly over gravel, each footfall deliberate, the way they taught him years ago when silence meant survival. And beside him, Rex moved differently today, not with the confident, scanning rhythm of a trained canine, but slower, ears twitching, head slightly lowered as if listening to something buried beneath the surface of the world, something Ethan couldn't hear, not yet, and that was what unsettled him most, because Rex didn't guess, Rex didn't hesitate. Every motion that dog made came from certainty carved through instinct and memory, and right now that certainty felt off, like a compass trembling near something it couldn't explain. The canyon stretched wide around them, nearly half a mile across at its widest point, walls rising steep and jagged, carved by centuries of wind and water into something both beautiful and indifferent, a place people hiked for the view, for the quiet, for the illusion that nothing bad had ever happened here. But Ethan knew better. Places like this kept things, they held onto echoes, onto stories that never quite found their way back out, and as he adjusted the strap of his pack, he caught Rex stopping, not slowing, not pausing, stopping completely. The leash went taut for a second before slackening as Ethan turned, brows tightening. "Rex," he said softly, not a command yet, just a check, but the dog didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all. His gaze fixed ahead toward a narrow split in the canyon wall, barely visible unless you were looking for it, a dark seam cutting into the rock like a wound that never healed, and there was something about the way Rex stood, not tense, not afraid, just anchored, like he had reached the exact point he had been walking toward all along. Ethan exhaled slowly, scanning the area. Nothing moved, no birds overhead, no distant hikers, just wind and stone and the faint scent of heat rising off the ground. "Come on!" He tried again, giving the leash a gentle pull, but Rex resisted, not with force, just enough to say no, and that was new, because Rex didn't refuse unless it mattered, unless there was something Ethan wasn't seeing, and for a moment, a flicker of memory passed through him, a different place, a different kind of silence. The kind that came right before everything changed. Rex had stood like this once before, still as a statue, eyes locked on something invisible, and seconds later it had saved Ethan's life. And now, standing in the middle of a canyon that had swallowed 2 girls whole 4 years ago without leaving a trace. Ethan felt that same quiet pressure building in the air, like the world holding its breath. Rex took one step forward, then another, slow, deliberate, pulling just enough to guide, not drag, and Ethan followed, not because he understood, but because somewhere deep in his bones, beneath the logic and the doubt, he trusted the silence. His dog was listening to more than the empty noise of everything else. The air changed before Ethan could explain why, not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like the canyon itself had drawn in a breath and decided not to let it go, and Rex kept moving with that same quiet certainty, step by step toward the narrow seam in the rock, his paws placing carefully as if he already knew the ground ahead was not to be trusted. Ethan followed at a distance of a few feet, the leash loose between them now. No longer guiding, just connecting, and he noticed how the usual sounds had faded, no wind cutting through the stone, no distant echo, only the soft scrape of Rex's paws and the faint rhythm of Ethan's own breathing, steady but tighter than before. "Easy," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than the dog, as his eyes traced the jagged walls around them, searching for anything that might explain the shift, but there was nothing obvious, no footprints, no recent signs of other hikers, just layers of dust undisturbed for what felt like years, and yet Rex's behavior said otherwise. The dogs slowed as they reached the split, a narrow opening barely wide enough for a man to pass through sideways, shadow pooling inside like ink, and he stopped again, not blocking the path this time, but standing just to the side of it, head angled slightly, ears forward, waiting. Ethan stepped closer, feeling the temperature dip a few degrees as he entered the shade, the sunlight behind him stretching his shadow long into the darkness ahead, and he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of recognition. This was the moment, the line where a normal hike turned into something else entirely, something that would not let him walk away unchanged. "You want me to go in there?" he said quietly, and Rex did not move, did not blink, just held that same fixed gaze as if the answer had already been decided long before they ever arrived. Ethan shifted his weight, boots scraping lightly against the stone as he turned his body sideways and stepped into the opening, the walls closing in around him, rough and cool to the touch, the air carrying a faint scent he could not quite place, not decay, not moisture, something older, something still, like a place untouched by time. And as he moved deeper, the light behind him faded, replaced by a dim, diffuse glow that filtered down from somewhere above. Barely enough to see by, he reached back. Instinctively, fingers brushing against Rex's fur as the dog followed close, steady, unafraid, and that steadiness anchored him more than anything else, because Rex did not enter spaces he did not understand, he did not lead blindly, every step had purpose, every pause meant something, and then, just a few yards in, Rex stopped again, this time lowering his head toward the ground, his nose hovering inches above the dust. Inhaling slowly, deliberately, not searching, confirming, Ethan crouched beside him, eyes narrowing as he scanned the ground, at first seeing nothing but uneven stone and fine red powder, until a faint impression caught the edge of his vision, subtle, almost erased by time, a shallow indentation that did not belong to the natural pattern of the canyon floor. He leaned closer, brushing away a thin layer of dust with the back of his glove, revealing more of it, not a full footprint, not clear enough to identify, but enough to suggest that someone had once stepped here, long ago, and something tightened in his chest, a quiet realization forming without words. Rex shifted slightly, moving a few inches forward and repeating the motion, nose low, tracing a path that curved deeper into the narrow passage, and Ethan followed that invisible line, his mind beginning to connect pieces he had not intended to revisit, the missing posters he had seen years ago at a gas station off Highway 89, two young faces smiling in a photograph, the dates beneath them stretching longer with each passing month until they stopped appearing altogether, and now here he was, standing in a place no one had thought to look. Guided not by a map, not by a report, but by a dog who refused to leave. "All right," Ethan whispered, the words barely audible in the stillness. "Show me." And Rex stepped forward into the dim light, leading them both further into the silence that no longer felt empty. Rex moved deeper without hesitation, and the passage narrowed just enough to make Ethan turn his shoulders sideways again, the rough stone brushing lightly against his jacket as he followed, each step slower now, more deliberate, because the ground beneath them had changed, no longer just loose dust and scattered rock but uneven, interrupted in subtle ways that did not belong to nature, and Ethan felt it before he fully saw it. That quiet shift from wilderness to something touched, altered. However long ago it had been, Rex paused again, lowering his body slightly this time, not in fear, but in focus, his nose hovering over a small patch of ground near the wall, and Ethan crouched beside him, his breath shallow as he leaned closer, brushing away another thin layer of dust with his gloved hand, and there it was, clearer now, a faint outline pressed into the dirt, smaller than an adult footprint, narrow, delicate. The kind that did not belong to a grown man wandering off trail, and something in Ethan's chest tightened, not sharp, not sudden, just a slow, heavy realization settling in place. He did not say the names out loud, but they surfaced anyway. Lily Parker, Emma Parker, two girls who had vanished on a summer afternoon 4 years ago, their faces printed on flyers that had once been taped to gas pumps and diner windows across half the state. Their story carried in quiet conversations that faded over time as hope did the same, and now here, in a place no search team had marked, no trail map had highlighted, there was a trace, fragile but real, and Rex shifted again, stepping forward along the wall, his body angled as if following an invisible thread, and Ethan rose slowly, eyes scanning ahead, the passage widening just enough to reveal a small bend, the kind that blocked what lay beyond until you were almost on top of it, and as they reached that turn, Rex stopped once more, completely still, ears forward. Head slightly tilted, listening, and Ethan felt it then, not a sound exactly, not something he could name, but a presence, a faint change in the air that made the silence feel less empty. He held his breath without meaning to, straining to catch it again, and for a moment there was nothing, just the distant hum of wind far above the canyon walls, and then, barely there, so soft it could have been imagined, a thin, uneven sound, like air moving where it should not. Ethan's head turned sharply toward the source, his eyes narrowing as he tried to focus. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, though he already knew Rex had. The dog did not move, did not react in any obvious way, but his stillness deepened, sharpened, as if every part of him had locked onto that faint signal, and Ethan took one cautious step forward, then another, rounding the bend slowly, his hand instinctively reaching out to steady himself against the rock, and as the space opened slightly, the light changed again. Dim but enough to reveal something ahead, not a full opening, not a cavern exactly, but a shallow recess carved into the canyon wall, partially hidden by a natural overhang, the kind of place you would miss entirely unless you were looking directly at it, and Ethan stopped at the edge of it, his pulse steady but louder now in his ears, and he listened, really listened this time, filtering out his own breath, the faint shift of his boots, the distant world beyond the canyon, and there it was again, clearer now, not wind, not water, something smaller, something human, a whisper of sound that carried just enough shape to feel like a voice, and Rex stepped forward into the shadow of that recess, his tail low, his posture calm but intent, and Ethan followed. Every instinct he had learned telling him this was the moment, the point where uncertainty ended and something real began, and he lowered his voice to almost nothing as he spoke into the dim space ahead, not knowing who or what might hear him. "It is okay," he said quietly, the words steady, grounded, the way you spoke when you did not want to break something fragile. "You are not alone anymore." And for a second, nothing answered, just silence pressing in from all sides, and then, from somewhere deeper within the shadow, a faint movement, so slight it barely disturbed the air, but enough to tell him one thing with absolute certainty: they had not imagined it, and whatever had been waiting here had just heard him too. The movement came again, slightly stronger this time, not sudden, not sharp, but enough to disturb the stillness that had held the canyon for years, and Ethan did not step forward right away. He stayed where he was, just at the edge of the shadow, letting his eyes adjust, letting the space reveal itself slowly instead of forcing it open, because whatever was inside had survived by staying hidden. And the last thing he wanted to do was take that safety away too quickly. Rex lowered himself further, his body close to the ground now, posture softened, not defensive, not alert in the way of threat, but careful, intentional, the way he had been trained around survivors, around the fragile. And Ethan recognized that shift immediately. It was the same behavior Rex had shown years ago, when they found a lost hiker barely conscious under a collapsed ridge, that same quiet patience, that same refusal to rush. "It is all right," Ethan said again, his voice steady, low, each word placed gently into the air, not pushing, not demanding, just offering, and he took one slow step forward into the recess, the dim light revealing more of the space now. Uneven stone walls curving inward, a shallow pocket carved naturally into the canyon, deeper than it first appeared, and then he saw it, not clearly at first, just shapes, two small forms huddled close to the back wall where the shadow was thickest. So still they almost blended into the rock, and for a moment Ethan thought they might not move at all, but then one shifted slightly, just enough for the faintest glint of light to catch in a pair of eyes, wide, cautious, watching. And something in his chest tightened in a way he had not felt in years, not fear, not shock, something quieter, heavier, like witnessing something that should not have been possible and yet was. "Hey," he said softly, lowering himself slowly to one knee, making himself smaller, less imposing, the way you would approach a frightened animal or a child who had learned to trust silence more than voices. "You are okay," he added, the words simple, clear, and Rex inched forward ahead of him, just a foot or two, then stopped again, lying down fully now, head resting low between his paws, eyes never leaving the figures in the shadow, and that was when the second shape moved, a smaller one, leaning slightly into the first, and a faint sound followed, not quite a word, not quite a breath, but something in between, fragile and uncertain, and Ethan held still, resisting the instinct to close the distance, because he understood now, this was not a moment you rushed, this was something you allowed to unfold on its own terms. Seconds passed, maybe longer, time stretching thin in the quiet, until the older of the two shapes shifted again, slowly, carefully, and stepped just enough into the dim light for him to see her face, pale beneath a layer of dust. Eyes wide but focused, not empty, not lost, just wary, calculating. And behind her, the younger one remained close, fingers gripping lightly at the fabric of her sleeve, and Ethan's breath caught for a fraction of a second before he steadied it again, grounding himself in the present, in the reality of what he was seeing. "My name is Ethan," he said gently, his voice calm, even. "This is Rex." And at the sound of his name, Rex's ears flicked once, but he did not move, did not break that careful stillness he had chosen, and the older girl's gaze shifted to the dog, lingering there, studying him in a way that felt different, deeper, as if she recognized something in him that Ethan could not fully understand, and then, after a long pause, her lips parted slightly, the first clear word breaking the silence, soft but unmistakable. "You came," she said, not as a question, not even as surprise, but as something closer to recognition, and Ethan felt that same quiet weight settle deeper in his chest, because this was not just a discovery, not just a rescue waiting to happen, this was something that had been waiting, holding on, for far longer than anyone had believed possible, and in that moment, standing at the edge of that hidden space, with Rex lying between them like a bridge built from trust alone, Ethan understood one thing with absolute clarity. They had not found the girls by chance, they had been led here for a reason. The words settled into the space between them like something fragile being returned to its rightful place, and Ethan did not move right away, he let the silence hold for a moment longer, because he understood now that this was not just about reaching them, it was about not breaking whatever had kept them here, alive, waiting. "We did," he said quietly after a few seconds, keeping his voice low and steady, not correcting her, not explaining, just meeting her where she stood, and the older girls' eyes lingered on him for a breath before shifting back to Rex, who had not moved at all, still lying low, calm, present, his amber eyes soft but unwavering, and something in the girl's posture eased just slightly, not fully, not completely, but enough to show that the distance between them had begun to close. "He heard us," she added, almost to herself, her voice thin but certain, and Ethan felt a subtle weight behind those words, something that reached beyond logic, beyond anything he could easily explain, but he did not question it, not now, not here. Instead he nodded once, slow, acknowledging it without needing to understand. "Yeah," he said. He did. And for the first time, the younger girl shifted closer to the edge of the shadow, her hand still gripping the older girl's sleeve, her eyes fixed on Rex with a kind of quiet wonder that did not match the fear Ethan had expected to see, and when Rex finally moved, it was only a few inches forward, slow and deliberate, lowering his head even more, offering himself without pressure, without expectation, and the younger girl watched him carefully, her breathing uneven but not panicked, and then, after a long moment, she let go of the sleeve and took one small step forward, the movement hesitant but real, and Ethan stayed completely still, not even adjusting his posture, because he knew this moment belonged to them, not to him. The girl's hand hovered in the air for a second before reaching down, fingers brushing lightly against the fur along Rex's neck, and the dog did not react, did not startle, he simply remained there, steady, grounded, as if he had been waiting for that exact touch, and the girl exhaled softly, a sound that carried more relief than fear, and leaned just a little closer, her hand settling more fully into his coat. "Emma," the older girl said quietly then, her voice stronger than before, as if the act of reaching out had given her something back, and Ethan nodded again, keeping his tone gentle. "Emma," he repeated, and then his eyes returned to the older girl. "And you are Lily," he added, not as a question, and she held his gaze for a moment before giving the smallest nod, confirmation without words, and something inside Ethan shifted, a quiet alignment of everything he had seen, everything he had felt since Rex first stopped at the canyon entrance, and he let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. "We are going to get you out of here," he said, careful with the phrasing, not rushing it, not making it sound like something immediate or overwhelming, just a simple truth placed gently in front of them. And Lily's eyes flickered briefly toward the narrow passage behind him, then back to Rex, and finally to Ethan. "Outside is still there," she said softly, the words carrying a strange weight, not doubt exactly, but distance, as if the world beyond the canyon had become something uncertain over time, and Ethan followed her gaze for a second, glancing back toward the faint light filtering in from the entrance, then returned his attention to her. "It is," he said, calm, grounded, "and it is waiting for you." And there was a pause, longer this time, the kind that stretched just enough to test whether the words would hold, and slowly, Lily shifted her weight forward, one careful step out of the deepest shadow, bringing her more fully into the dim light, and Emma stayed close to Rex, her hand still resting against his fur, as if anchoring herself to something she trusted more than anything else in that moment, and Ethan reached slowly toward his pack, his movements deliberate, making sure they could see everything he was doing. And he pulled out a small canteen, unscrewing the cap with a soft twist. "Here," he said gently, setting it down on the ground between them rather than handing it directly, giving them the choice, the control, and Lily watched it for a second before stepping forward again, picking it up carefully, as if testing whether it was real, and when she took a small sip, her eyes closed briefly, not in relief exactly, but in recognition, like something remembered rather than discovered, and Emma followed a moment later. Still close to Rex, still grounded by his presence, and Ethan sat back slightly on his heel, giving them space, watching quietly as the moment unfolded, because this was not just about leaving the canyon, this was about crossing back into a world they had not seen in years, and he understood that the first step was not the climb out, it was this, trust, slow, fragile, but real. And as Rex finally lifted his head just enough to glance back at Ethan for a brief second, their eyes met, and nothing needed to be said. Because the dog had already done what no map, no search team, no plan had been able to do, he had listened when no one else could, and he had not left until someone followed. For a moment, no one moved, not because they could not, but because something quiet and fragile had finally settled between them, something that needed to be held before it could be carried any further, and Ethan let that moment breathe, his posture still low, his presence steady, giving the girls time to feel the reality of what was happening, not rushed, not forced, just unfolding, and Rex shifted slightly now, rising from the ground in a smooth, controlled motion. Not breaking the calm but gently changing it, his body turning toward the narrow passage behind Ethan as if to remind them that there was a way out, that the path existed and had been waiting all along, and Emma's hand lingered on his fur for a second longer before she stepped back just enough to stay close to Lily, her fingers now gripping her sister's sleeve again, not out of fear, but out of habit, a quiet reassurance, and Lily looked toward the opening, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the faint light beyond it, not with excitement, but with careful thought, as if measuring something invisible. "It is far," she said softly, not asking, just stating what she believed, and Ethan followed her gaze, glancing toward the passage that led back to the canyon floor, then back to her. "Not too far," he answered, his tone calm, grounded. "We will take it slow." And he shifted his weight, rising carefully to his feet, making sure his movements stayed within their line of sight, nothing sudden, nothing that might break the fragile trust that had formed. And he stepped back just a little, opening the space between them and the path, an invitation rather than a command, and Rex moved first, as he always did, stepping into the passage with quiet confidence, then pausing after a few feet to look back, not rushing ahead, not leaving, just waiting, and that was all it took. Lily took one small step forward, then another, Emma staying close at her side, their movements slow but deliberate. And Ethan stayed just behind them, not leading, not pushing. Simply present, a steady point in the shifting moment, and as they entered the narrow passage, the light changed again, growing slightly brighter with each step, the air warmer, carrying the faint scent of open space beyond the stone, and Ethan noticed the way the girls reacted to it, subtle at first, a slight squint, a hesitation in their steps, as if their eyes and bodies were adjusting to something they had not felt in a long time, and he slowed even more, matching their pace, allowing the transition to happen gradually, because he understood that leaving was not just physical, it was something deeper, something that took time to unfold. And halfway through the passage Emma paused, her hand tightening briefly on Lily's sleeve, and Ethan stopped immediately, not asking, not pressing, just waiting, and after a second, Emma looked back toward Rex, who had already turned to face them again, his presence steady, unchanging, and she took a small breath before continuing, step by step, until the narrow walls began to widen and the soft glow of the canyon floor came into view, and when they finally stepped out into the open, the light spread across them fully, warm and golden, and both girls stopped again, not from fear, but from something else, something quieter, like recognition mixed with disbelief, and Ethan stood a few feet behind them, watching, not interrupting, because this moment did not belong to him, it belonged to them, and Rex stepped forward into the light, then turned once more, standing beside them, not ahead, not behind, just there, as if marking the boundary between where they had been and where they were now, and for a long second, no one spoke, the canyon stretching wide and silent around them, holding its breath one last time before letting them go. The light did not rush them, it settled slowly, wrapping around their shoulders, touching their faces in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, and Lily stood still at the edge of it, her eyes half narrowed, not from brightness alone but from the weight of what it meant, as if stepping into the open had pulled something deeper into motion inside her, something she had kept quiet for a long time. Emma stayed close, her hand now resting lightly against Rex again, as though the dog was the one constant that made everything else make sense, and Rex did not move away, he remained steady beside her, his posture calm, grounded, watching the space around them with quiet awareness, not searching anymore, just present, and Ethan gave them that space, standing a few feet behind, his eyes scanning the canyon out of habit, checking the ridgelines, the distant paths, the direction of the sun, calculating the safest way back without ever speaking it out loud, because he knew this moment was not about movement yet. It was about letting them feel the world again, and after a while, Lily took a slow breath, deeper than the ones before, her shoulders rising and falling as if she was testing the air itself, and she turned slightly, looking not at Ethan, not at the canyon walls, but at the sky above, a narrow strip of blue framed by stone, and her expression shifted just a fraction, not fully, but enough to show that something inside her recognized it. "It is still big," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder that had been buried beneath caution, and Ethan followed her gaze, nodding once. "It is," he replied, keeping his tone soft, steady. "Bigger than it looks from inside." And that seemed to settle something, not completely, but enough for her to shift her weight forward, taking another step into the open, and Emma followed, closer this time to Ethan's side, though her hand never left Rex for long, and as they moved, the ground beneath them changed from the uneven stone of the passage to the wider, flatter stretch of the canyon floor, and Ethan adjusted his pace to match theirs, slow, measured, careful not to outstep them, because every movement mattered now, every step was part of something larger than just leaving, and after a few yards, Emma looked up at him for the first time, really looked, her eyes searching his face with a kind of quiet curiosity that had not been there before. "Are we going far?" she asked, her voice small but steady, and Ethan met her gaze, not rushing his answer. "We are going to a place where people can help," he said, choosing each word with care. "It is not too far, and we will go together." And she held his gaze for a second longer before nodding slightly, accepting it in the simple way children do when something feels right. And Lily glanced back once toward the passage they had come from, her eyes lingering on the shadowed opening for just a moment, not with longing, not with fear, but with something quieter, something like acknowledgement, and then she turned forward again, aligning herself with the direction Rex had already chosen, because the dog had begun to move once more, not pulling, not leading in a way that demanded attention, just walking at a steady pace toward the wider stretch of the canyon, and Ethan recognized that pattern, Rex was no longer searching, he was guiding them out, step by step, and the rhythm of it began to settle into something almost natural, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, the faint shift of wind returning as the canyon opened wider, the distant echo of space that had been absent before, and with each step, the girl's movements became just a little more certain, not fully confident, not yet, but no longer hesitant, and Ethan stayed just behind and to the side close. Enough to reach them if needed, far enough to let them walk on their own, and as the sun lowered slightly, casting longer shadows across the canyon floor, he allowed himself one brief glance at Rex, just a fraction of a second, and the dog met it, that same quiet understanding passing between them without a single word, because this was not over yet, but the hardest part, the part no one could plan for, no one could map, had already happened, and it had started with a dog who refused to leave. The canyon widened with every step, the walls pulling back just enough to let the sky stretch higher above them, and the air shifted again, carrying a faint warmth that had been missing deeper inside, and Ethan kept his pace steady, watching the terrain ahead while listening to the rhythm of the footsteps beside him, the uneven cadence of two children relearning how to walk through open space, and Rex moved slightly ahead now, not far, never far. His path deliberate, guiding them toward a gradual slope that led out of the lower basin, and as they reached it, the ground angled upward, scattered with loose stones and patches of dry brush, and Ethan slowed further, stepping closer without crowding. "We will take this part easy," he said softly, his voice calm, offering direction without pressure, and Lily nodded once, her eyes tracing the incline, measuring it the same way she had measured everything since they met, and she stepped forward first, placing her foot carefully, testing the ground before shifting her weight, and Emma followed, her movements smaller but more certain now, her hand brushing Rex's side every few steps as if checking that he was still there. And he always was. Steady, unwavering, matching their pace without needing to be asked, and halfway up the slope, the wind returned in a soft, steady current, moving through the canyon with a low, distant sound that carried something different with it, something familiar to Ethan, and he lifted his head slightly, listening, not just with his ears but with the part of him that had learned to read the world beyond what could be seen, and there it was. Faint but unmistakable, a distant mechanical hum, far enough to be soft, close enough to be real, and his eyes shifted toward the upper ridge, scanning the horizon where the canyon began to open into the wider desert beyond, and he saw it then, a thin line of dust far off in the distance, rising slowly against the light, the kind that did not come from wind alone, and something in his chest eased just a fraction, not relief yet, but confirmation, they were not alone out here anymore. And he lowered his gaze back to the girls, keeping his voice even. "We are getting closer," he said, not pointing, not drawing too much attention, just letting the information settle, and Lily glanced up at him briefly before looking ahead again, her steps steady, and Emma tilted her head slightly, as if she could hear it too now, that distant presence moving toward them, and they continued, step by step, until the slope leveled out and the canyon floor gave way to a wider stretch of open ground, the horizon expanding, the sky stretching farther than it had before. And they stopped there for a moment, not because they had to, but because something in the space invited it, and Rex moved a few steps ahead before turning back again, his posture relaxed now, no longer searching, no longer guiding with urgency, just watching, and Ethan stepped up beside the girls, not in front, not behind, just there, sharing the same line of sight as they looked out across the open land, and the sound grew clearer now, the distant hum resolving into something recognizable, an engine, steady and approaching, and a small vehicle appeared along the far edge of the canyon, moving slowly along a dirt track that cut through the landscape, its shape still indistinct at this distance but unmistakably real, and Emma's hand tightened briefly against Rex's fur, not in fear, but in something closer to uncertainty, and Lily's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, her expression unreadable but steady, and Ethan did not rush to explain, did not fill the moment with too many words, because this was another threshold, another crossing, and it needed the same patience as the one before. "They are here to help," he said quietly after a few seconds, his voice grounded, certain. And he let the words rest there, simple, clear, and the vehicle continued to move closer, its shape growing more defined with each passing second, the low sound of its engine carrying across the open space, and Rex stepped back toward them, closing the distance again until he stood at Emma's side, his presence as steady as it had been since the beginning, and Ethan glanced at him once more, just a brief look, and in that silent exchange, there was no question left, only the quiet understanding that the path they had followed had led exactly where it was meant to go. The vehicle slowed as it approached, its tires rolling carefully over the uneven ground, the low hum of the engine softening until it settled into a quiet idle a short distance away, and for a moment, no one inside stepped out, as if even they understood that this was not a moment to rush, and Ethan remained where he was, his posture steady, his presence calm, allowing the distance to close naturally rather than forcing it. And Rex stood beside Emma, his body relaxed now, no tension left in his stance, only a quiet watchfulness that had not faded since the first step into the canyon, and Lily's eyes stayed fixed on the vehicle. Her expression unreadable but no longer guarded in the same way. Something in her had shifted, not fully, not completely, but enough to allow what came next to happen, and after a few seconds, the driver's door opened slowly, a man stepping out with measured movements, hands visible, voice low as he spoke, though the words did not carry clearly at first, just the tone, calm, careful, and Ethan gave a small nod in response, lifting one hand slightly in acknowledgement, a silent signal that everything here was stable, that this was not a scene of urgency but one of quiet arrival, and the man paused a few steps away, taking in the sight before him, the two girls standing in the open, the dog at their side, the veteran just behind them, and something in his posture softened, his shoulders easing as the reality of it settled in, and he spoke again, this time louder, clearer. "We are here to help." The same words Ethan had used moments earlier, but now carrying outward into the wider world, and Emma's hand tightened briefly against Rex's fur before loosening again, her eyes shifting between the man and Ethan, searching for confirmation, and Ethan met her gaze, steady, grounded, and gave a small, reassuring nod, and that was enough. She took one careful step forward, then another, not leaving Rex behind but moving with him, and Lily followed a moment later, her pace measured but certain. And the distance between them and the waiting help closed slowly, not rushed, not forced. Just step by step, until they reached the edge of that new space where others stood ready to receive them, and Ethan stopped there, not stepping into it with them, not taking that moment away, because this part belonged to the girls, their return, their crossing back into something larger than the canyon had allowed, and Rex paused as well, standing just at their side, not moving ahead, not pulling back. Simply present as he had been from the beginning, and as the man knelt slightly, lowering himself to meet them at eye level, his voice softening even more, the girls hesitated for only a second before continuing forward, drawn not by words alone but by the quiet certainty that had carried them this far, and when Emma finally let go of Rex's fur, it was not sudden, not reluctant, just a gentle release, as if she knew he was not leaving even if he was no longer the only thing holding her steady, and Lily glanced back once, her eyes finding Ethan's for a brief moment, and in that look there was no need for explanation, no need for questions. Just a simple understanding that something had ended and something else had begun, and Ethan returned the look with a small nod, nothing more, because that was all that was needed, and as the girls stepped fully into the care of those who had come for them, the space shifted once more, the quiet of the canyon giving way to the subtle movement of voices, of hands ready to help, of a world that had not forgotten them after all, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him like something he had been holding since the moment Rex first stopped at the edge of that narrow passage. And he reached down, his hand resting briefly against Rex's neck, fingers pressing lightly into the thick fur, not as praise, not as command, just acknowledgement, and Rex leaned into it for a fraction of a second before lifting his head again, his gaze drifting back toward the canyon behind them, the place that had held its secret for so long, and now stood empty, silent, as if it had simply been waiting for the right soul to listen, and Ethan followed that gaze for a moment. The wind moving softly through the open space, carrying nothing now but the quiet. After something has been set right, and then he turned back toward the world in front of him, where two lives had just been returned, Not by chance, not by force, but by a bond that had refused to break, even when no one else could hear it.